Okay, so let's be honest. Have you ever had a friendship, just completely go off the rails? Like years later, you're still wondering what the heck happened.
Oh, absolutely. It's like a universal experience, right? Friendships are complicated. They come with all these unspoken expectations and needs that constantly change, and sometimes it's like, boom, collision.
Exactly.
Uh,
And that's actually what we're diving into today. You sent in this article about Gabe and Tim, these two friends, whose relationship went through some serious ups and downs. Like, we're talking intense connection, romantic rivalry, years of silence. They even ended up in a one-man show about it all.
Yeah, it's fascinating how their story really highlights how differently people experience and process emotions, especially in the context of a close friendship.
For sure, like two sides of the same coin. So, to give everyone the background, Gabe and Tim met in college in a poetry class. Can you believe it? Talk about finding your people. They bonded over their love for musicals. They even both played Sky Masterson in Guys and Dolls. I mean, have you ever had a friend where it just clicked like that?
It's often those shared experiences, especially the unique ones, that spark those instant connections, like finding your tribe. It creates this foundation of understanding, inside jokes, a sense of belonging, all those things that really strengthen a friendship.
Totally. And Gabe and Tim were basically inseparable, all-nighters, debating everything under the sun, even working together at a summer camp for kids with chronic illnesses. But that's actually where things get a little messy.
Oh, yeah, that whole introducing a third party thing, and a romantic one at that. That's where unspoken expectations and boundaries can get really tricky.
It's so true. So at this camp, they both meet Kate. At first, Gabe and Kate kind of hit it off. They even share a kiss, but it fizzles out pretty quickly. Then, fast forward to New Year's, Gabe's in Scotland. Tim comes to visit and drops a bombshell. He and Kate are now a couple.
Oof, that's gotta hurt. Not just missing out on a potential romance, but also that feeling of betrayal, like your best friend went behind your back. That can be incredibly painful.
And the way Tim told him. Ugh. Just imagine your best friend casually throws out a "life sucks" and then you die, before telling you he's with the girl you were into. And then, to make things even worse, he basically says, "We're not sorry." How would you feel in that moment?
What probably stung the most was the lack of empathy and sensitivity. It wasn't just about the romantic relationship, it was about feeling disregarded and unimportant to someone Gabe considered a close friend.
Exactly. And that missing apology, that lack of acknowledgement of how Gabe felt, really became a sticking point. It festered for 8 years. He even channeled all that frustration and hurt into writing and performing a one-man show about the whole thing.
That's so interesting. It really shows how art can be such a powerful way to process complex emotions. Maybe he was looking for closure or trying to communicate with Kim indirectly. Have you ever used creativity to deal with a difficult situation, listener?
It is an interesting choice, for sure. But here's the thing. Even though the show was basically about Tim, Gabe never actually invited him to see it. He just kind of hoped Tim would find out about it and show up.
Wow, that's putting a lot of weight on an assumption. It really highlights how indirect communication can be so ineffective, especially when you're dealing with sensitive issues.
You're telling me?
Yeah.
Thankfully, the show's producer, Aviva D. Kornfeld, convinced Tim to go to one of the performances. Can you imagine being in his shoes? Watching yourself get portrayed on stage in front of an audience.
I can't even imagine. It really makes you think about whose narrative is being presented and how memory and perception can be so different for the people involved in a shared experience.
Absolutely. You've got Gabe's perspective, Tim's perspective, and then the audience is getting this third-hand account. And get this, Tim sits through the entire show. He even endures those awkward audience oohs when Gabe recounts the infamous "we're not sorry" line.
Wow. That must have been incredibly tough for him, but maybe also powerful,
Right.
To actually see how his actions affected his friend, even years later, really makes you think, right? How our experiences shape the way we remember things.
Totally. So after the show, they finally have that conversation they should have had 8 years ago.
Such a pivotal moment, right? So much potential for reconciliation, understanding, closure, but also for things to go even more wrong.
Seriously, like so much riding on this conversation. And to make things even more interesting, Tim claims he doesn't actually remember their falling out as vividly as Gabe does, which, again, just shows how subjective memory can be, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's natural to hold on to memories that were emotionally charged for us. It's entirely possible Tim just didn't place the same level of importance on their friendship as Gabe, so the memories don't carry the same weight.
Which seems to be exactly the case. They talk about this time when Tim tried to reconnect with Gabe by inviting him to a concert featuring a composer they both loved, Edvard Grieg. Tim thought it was this huge gesture, a peace offering, because the concert included a piece called The Last Spring, which had this special meaning for them. But Gabe totally missed the point.
Oh, classic miscommunication. Tim was relying on this shared sentimentality without actually saying what he meant. And Gabe, still hurt and guarded, saw it as this superficial attempt to smooth things over. It makes you wonder, listener, have you ever had a gesture totally backfire because of miscommunication?
It's like they were speaking different languages, even though they were using the same words, both hoping for this unspoken understanding.
It happens all the time in relationships. We assume the people we're close to should just get us, without having to spell things out. But really, clear and direct communication, especially about our emotions, is so crucial for any relationship to work.
Couldn't agree more. So back to the conversation. Gabe finally asked the question that's been haunting him for years. Does Tim regret how he handled the whole Kate thing?
The moment of truth. I'm dying to know how Gabe reacted to that. Was it what he had been waiting for all these years?
Well, Tim admits he feels bad for hurting Gabe, and even apologizes for how he delivered the news back then. But the apology kind of falls flat.
Interesting. Really shows the limitations of apologies, They're important for acknowledging you did something wrong, but they can't erase the pain or magically fix a broken relationship. Sometimes an apology just isn't enough.
And then, to make things even more complicated, the producer, Aviva, throws out this really pointed question. Was the friendship as important to Tim as it was to Gabe?
Oh, now that's a tough one to answer, honestly. It really gets at the heart of those unspoken imbalances that can exist in relationships, right? It's rare for both people to feel the exact same way, and acknowledging that discrepancy can be so hard.
Definitely throws a wrench in the whole best friends reunited narrative. Tim kind of dances around the question, but eventually admits that while he valued their friendship, Gabe wasn't necessarily in his top tier of friends.
Ouch. That's gotta sting. Hearing that the importance you placed on a relationship wasn't necessarily reciprocated in the same way. What might be a defining friendship for one person could be a valued but less central connection for another.
Like, they were operating on completely different definitions of best friend.
Right.
For Gabe, it was this deep, almost soulmate level connection. For Tim, it was just one of many important friendships in his life.
And that gap in perception can be so hard to bridge. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about realizing that we all hold different places in each other's lives, and those places don't always line up perfectly.
So knowing that, can a friendship like that ever fully recover? It feels like such a fundamental crack.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Moving forward is definitely possible, but it takes work, honesty, and a willingness to accept the new dynamic. And sometimes understanding doesn't lead to reconciliation, but to a new understanding of the relationship itself.
It's kind of crazy, right? Even after hearing Tim say, pretty directly, that their friendship wasn't on the same level for him, Gabe still believes they were best friends. Like, how do you make sense of that?
It really shows how strong those memories can be. We create stories in our minds, and sometimes even when we get information that challenges those stories, we hold on tight. I think Gabe's trying to protect that idea of their friendship, that feeling of closeness, even if it doesn't totally match up with reality.
It brings up that question of what's more important, the actual objective truth of a relationship or how we experienced it. Like, if it felt like a best friendship to Gabe, does it matter that Tim didn't see it the same way? What do you think, listener? Where does the real truth of a relationship lie?
It's a tough one. It reminds me of the idea that we each create our own reality based on what we perceive and experience. What feels like a casual connection to one person might be a life-changing relationship to someone else.
It's amazing how different our realities can be, even when we're living through the same things.
Exactly. And that can make it so hard to reconcile differences or find closure. It's not just about understanding each other better, it's about bridging the gap in how we each saw the relationship, which is a way harder thing to do.
So where does that leave Gabe and Tim? Do they walk away feeling like they've gotten closure, or is there just more confusion?
Tough to say for sure. They definitely got a better understanding of each other's perspectives, but that doesn't mean forgiveness or a rekindled friendship. Maybe just saying those things out loud, acknowledging those differences, was enough to bring some closure.
That's a good point sometimes. Just understanding, even if it's not a perfect ending, can be a resolution in itself. It gives us a lot to think about. Like, how do we define our own friendships? Are we on the same page as the people we're close to?
Such great questions to consider. This whole story is a good reminder of how important communication, honesty, and empathy are when you're dealing with the complicated nature of relationships. I mean, friendships can be messy, right?